Greetings everybody, my name is Tommy the Game Master and welcome to my channel. Well, I know I've been promising you guys a Chrono Trigger review for a long time, but I've moved a lot in the last few years, and every time I moved I lost a few files while moving, I lost scripts, and I even had an original review going and couldn't find it once I got my computer hooked up. It's like it never existed. So I've had to start from scratch a lot trying to get this video done. But enough of my problems. Let's get talking about Chrono Trigger. The good, the bad, and the Steam release. Okay, so what type of game do you get when you combine Harunobu Sakaguchi, Nobu Uematsu, the two guys that helped make Final Fantasy famous, with Yuji Horii and Akira Toriyama, the guys behind Dragon Quest's success? Why, of course you get Blue Dragon, a solid but somewhat underrated gem for the Xbox 360. Oh wait, you're here for the other game these guys created, their original collaboration, Chrono Trigger. A game a lot of people say is hands down the best JRPG ever created, and do I personally agree with this sentiment? Well, not really. I can name a bunch of other JRPGs that I like a little bit more, but like a lot of games and movies that get the best ever tag, it got it by being a really solid, well thought out game that did a lot of new innovations back in its day. With that said, these may be also some of the reasons that I feel that this game is a bit overhyped, and a lot of things that are really invented about it are really only a bit on the surface level. So let me do the usual examination and we will start with the story. The story in Chrono Trigger is a good combination of what you find in a classic Dragon Quest game and a classic Final Fantasy game all rolled into one. Like a good Dragon Quest game, the world itself is a character as it constantly changes and is just filled with memorable places and moments to experience. And to help you get involved with the world and these characters and these experiences, your main character, Chrono, is for the most part a silent protagonist. But like Final Fantasy, it has the fantasy elements of the plot and the characters you travel with. So while Chrono may keep his big mouth shut, the others are quite talkative. All but Aaliyah have some past baggage they hope to sort out on their quest, and all of them are memorable. So let's get on with the plot. The game's story starts off in the year 1000 AD. Chrono's homeland of Guardia is celebrating its 1000th year anniversary and throwing a huge celebration. While attending the festival, Chrono runs into a strange girl named Marley, and the two decide to go and explore and have fun at this festival. And if you haven't seen any other reviews of the game, you know how you treat her at the fair becomes very important later on. Anyways, the two decide to stop at Chrono's friend's Luca's booth, who has invented a teleporter. But when Marley steps up, rather than teleporting her, it zaps her into a nearby portal that closes on her. Chrono, of course being the hero, boards the teleporter and zaps himself into the portal too. He finds himself in a similar looking world and kingdom, but it's now 400 years in the past. He manages to find Marley just as she Marty McFlies herself into non-existent. It seems that during this time, one of Marley's ancestors, which Marley looks almost identical to, got kidnapped by the enemy, and although the original timeline she got saved, and the new one she created by stopping the rescue mission, managed to erase herself from history. Fortunately, Chrono and Luca, along with a new ally, a talking frog named, well, Frog, come to the rescue and restore Marley. But Chrono's misadventures aren't done yet. Right after returning home, he is quickly arrested and put on trial, which brings me to one of the three big things that I think are overblown in this game, the trial scene. Yeah, let me make this clear. For 1995, having a morality gauge and even a scene where a player's action will be judged is quite novel. And yeah, I say it's probably helped inspire some of the morality gauges we've seen in later Western RPGs of today. But here's the thing. It's just narration and doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Regardless of the outcome, Chrono will still be thrown in jail for 3 days waiting execution, either because he was ordered to be executed or the Chancellor, who doesn't like him, tells the Warden to execute him in 3 days, and you have to break out with the help of Luca. Yeah, overblown and not really a big whoop. Good idea and amazing concept for the day, but it's just really a narrative ploy in my book. Anyways, after this event happens, the gang ends up in the future, a world that is almost completely devoid of life and humanity only hangs on by a mere thread. After a few more misadventures and meeting a friendly robot named Robo, the gang finds out how it happened. It seems in the year 1999 AD, a creature named Lavos woke and destroyed civilization, creating this bleak future that they are now in. The gang vows to use their new time-traveling powers to find out where Lavos came from and defeat him before the day of Lavos comes, and see if they can't change the world from this bleak future. From there, all kind of craziness happens. Cave women and dinosaurs, talking swords, and lost kingdoms all have to be explored to figure out how the mystery of Lavos is to be answered. To be honest, I would say the game has 3 acts, the first 2 being extremely linear, the first one exploring all sorts of smaller timeline scenarios and the hunt for the truth of Lavos, and the second one being the Kingdom of Zeal, which is a lost kingdom that was searching for a way to control Lavos. Not to give too much away, but they learned the hard way that this was a really bad idea. The third act begins shortly after the death of Chrono. Oh yeah, that's the second big thing people like to talk about. In a lot of classic JRPG, it was impossible for the main hero to die. But not in Chrono Trigger. At the end of the Kingdom of Zeal arc, your team gets into a battle with Lavos in which they are not prepared, and Chrono ends up making the ultimate sacrifice to save his friends. From then on, the team's leader is who you pick. You can even finish the game without Chrono. But you can also get him back by doing a really easy side quest revolving around getting a doppelganger and then climbing a mountain to find a portal to that fated battle so the party can switch Chrono out with his dummy doppelganger. But this is optional. You can finish the game, like I said, without Chrono and get a different ending by doing just that. Also, you can choose whether or not you want to recruit Magus or not towards the third act, which basically depends on whether or not you want to fight him or not, considering how he is kind of the villain during that first act. But the third act is probably one of the best, both from story and gameplay side too. There are tons of side quests that just open up. None of them are too long or too tedious to take part of. Basically just ends up you flying to different areas and doing a bunch of things that are usually easily explained. Like I said, each of these side quests will take no more than half an hour to do, and they all focus on a character getting over their personal dilemmas. Frog's guilty conscience over a death of a friend he blames himself for, Robo finding out what his true nature is, Marley's relationship with her father. Everybody gets a little side quest that helps their character and gets some really great items and abilities. Everybody but Ayala, yeah, you don't really matter as far as the narrative goes. You're just crazy cave woman from beginning to end. Still, it's neat that these exist, and the way they are implemented is pretty good. They're not so far out of the way or grindy that they are annoying. They're presented as short and quick side quests / puzzles you can do in order to find them. And of course, since I'm playing on the Steam version, there are a few other new story elements thrown in, and it's mostly consists of trying to tie the original Chrono Trigger to its sequel Chrono Cross. Yeah, for direct sequels, Chrono Cross wasn't a terrible one, but damn, talk about missing out on all the charms of the original. Cross basically kills 4 of the main characters of Chrono Trigger off-screen and as brutally as possible. And SZ has done whatever it takes to try to connect the happy-go-lucky ending of Chrono Trigger and the somewhat humorous feel of Trigger into its more dark and somber sequel, and usually ends up drawing more attention to the problems than solving it. No difference here in these new editions. Basically, completing a few more side quests lets you fight against a character named Dalton, who was one of the villains from the Zeal era, and we find out he has something to do with the fact that Chrono's Kingdom of Guardia no longer exists in Chrono Cross 20 years later. And if you complete these optional dungeons and story elements, you get to fight against the Time Eater, who, in this version, quickly kicked my ass. But at least the girl being held hostage has the right colored hair. That is actually the correct person. I don't know where they got the character design off Chrono Cross for her. Maybe if I ever do a Chrono Cross review, I'll get into that more because it's almost hilariously bad. Anyways, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the game's different endings last. Most of them are actually really good. Basically, after you beat the game, you can restart the game with your stats and weapons for the most part unaffected. A few of those weapons that got changed during the side quests, stats will go back down, but those are relatively few and far between. And you can fight Levos pretty much at any time. Defeat them at different parts of the game story, and you can unlock some endings. Some are really cool, others add extra story to the characters, and others are just plain weird. They're worth checking out and trying to find them all. Anyways, as far as the story goes, for its day, I think Chrono Trigger's story is really good. It's not perfect, it's not the best, but it does a good job of combining what makes Final Fantasy, classic Final Fantasy, and classic Dragon Quest games so good and combining them into one package that's just easy to love. Like I said, it's not perfect, but it is really good. Let's talk about the gameplay when it comes to Chrono Trigger. When it comes to its gameplay, it is a fantastic game. We'll start with the battle system. First, it's more like a Final Fantasy battle system from the Super Nintendo era. It uses the ATB system, so it should feel familiar, except they threw in several new notches. All of them make the game feel a lot better, makes the combat more enjoyable. Alright, first off, where your placement of your characters on screen now matters. So if a character throws a wave at an enemy across the screen, where that character is and how the enemies align can oftentimes impact how many enemies get hit by that move. For example, a move that you will learn early on called Cyclone can hit a bunch of enemies if they're grouped together when Chrono uses it. But it gets even more complex than that. You have dual and triple text, which mean you do it with another character on screen. So, for example, that Cyclone, you can add in extra fire or ice power to it. Or you can get two healers together and have double cure, which will cure everybody's HP to 100% when used. It's a really fantastic battle system. It really makes you think. And because of that, it also makes it so where each character is now different. And each character is now useful. Not all teams may be useful for all situations, but there isn't a character where you will want to bench them for the rest of the game, because they are all good and unique with the way they use this tech system, this double and triple tech system. There's plenty to experiment, and it's just extremely fun. And I like how balanced it is. No one character is going to ever get so OP where you won't need the other ones. And you do get one OP character. Again, he is optional, easy to recruit, and that is Magus. However, the way they balance him out is that he is OP. He has access to a whole bunch of field magic. He has access to all the elemental skills. He's got a pretty decent attack strength too. However, he can't do any double or triple techs with anyone, so you have to balance between how you want your entire team to work, and just because he's a really strong character, he can throw off the balance of your team in a negative way. I like that, and it made the game really fun. Let's talk about one of the things that does annoy me, is a lot of people praise this as being one of the few classic JRPGs that doesn't use a random encounter. But don't think this is one of the ones where you get to see the enemies on the field and avoid them. There are a few rooms like that, but for the most part, it's all scripted battle. And this really gets annoying if you're playing the PlayStation 1 version of the game due to the load times that that game had, and it also kind of takes out some of the charms, or it can be frustrating if you get lost in the dungeon or backtracking and you just hear a bunch of yells because you always know that's when the enemy comes out, and it does make the game seem like there's a little less surprises, especially on multiple playthroughs, which this game does encourage you to do. It's a small nitpick, but it's still a nitpick, so I can't quite give it the credit a lot of people do about being able to avoid enemies. It's not true. A lot of times they're scripted battles. When it comes to the dungeons and the stage design, the dungeons are all top notch. They're all fun to go through. The puzzles they have are really fun, really interesting. Nothing to really complain about there. And then finally, yeah, let's talk about that third act again, where you have to save Chrono and all those side quests. This is actually a really fun part of the game because up until that part, the game is incredibly linear, but after that you get a time traveling machine called the Epoch, and it also comes equipped with wings, so you can fly anywhere at any time and explore anything. And there's just a lot of secrets in this world, and you will get tips about where most of these side quests are. You can talk to an old man named Jasper at a place called the End of Time. He will give you some clues about where to go to start triggering these side quests. And then once they're triggered, you will have to do some mild puzzle solving to figure out what time you have to go to, because oftentimes the solution that you need to find isn't found in the same time where the problem is. For example, there's this one area where the whole area is a desert. You find out in the past that a woman tried to regrow the forest and failed. The solution is to, of course, to drop off Robo the robot there so he can help her regrow the forest, and then in the future time that area becomes the forest, and a few other side quests are also kicked off too with some of the other characters. It's like I said, it's just a really fantastic way of doing these last minute side quests that keep you invested instead of just wanting you to skip to the last boss to fight them, defeat them, and get them out of the way. So I like the way they do that. Now let's talk about some of the Steam versions and its differences when it comes to the gameplay. I'm for the most part going to talk about the graphics area of the Steam problem later, but let's talk about a few things they added to the gameplay. Um, First off, there's a few new dungeons that were added into the DS version, and they are located here. You will have to beat the game the first time and access these on New Game Plus, and you will be able to access them in the third act, as you will need Epoch to reach all of them. And for the most part, I thought these dungeons were a mixed bag, and it's not because the new areas themselves are terrible. In fact, a lot of these dungeons I found were very interesting, very challenging, and nice additions. The problem is the way they made them. It's not one new area. Instead, what they did is these dungeons are split into three areas. The first part is a real drag to get through because they're basically old areas you've been through all cut together from different dungeons to make this hodgepodge of a dungeon that you have to go through. And then finally, you will hit the new scenario, the new dungeons with the new puzzles. And then again, this areas are really fun. And once you finish all of this new area and find the solution, find the exit, you will be greeted with a doppelganger fight against one of the original three members of your party, Chrono, Luca, and Marley. And when you beat them, they'll get a stat increase for finishing that doppelganger battle. It's really interesting, and they're not bad additions. I just wish they cut out those first areas. They're not needed if you're not adding anything new. It just makes going through them more tedious. And again, beating these three dungeons will get you access to an extra fight against the Time Eater. Overall, what I can say about the gameplay when it comes to Chrono Trigger is it's really fun, it's really addictive. It's for the most part super balanced. Some of the newer stuff they added in when it comes to the Steam version of the game, when it comes to those extra dungeons, aren't quite as good as the classic dungeons. But overall, I still found the Steam version when it comes to the gameplay to be fun, and the new stuff is just there. It doesn't interfere with playing through the classic game. It's all side stuff. Overall, gameplay still solid, still really fun. Let's talk about the graphics and what the Steam version does terribly wrong. When it comes to its overall look, Chrono Trigger is one of the best looking Super Nintendo games ever made. The sprites are large and detailed. There's a lot of animation and different poses to them. Square Enix took a lot of time creating these different characters, and it uses Toriyama's art style beautifully. And the areas and the worlds that you explore are also beautiful and very memorable. So when it comes to the graphics compared to 1995, Chrono Trigger has aged like fine wine. It still looks good, at least in its original form. Let's start talking about where they screwed up on Steam. Alright, for a real high definition version of this game that went back to the original code and rebuilt the game to be high definition, look good on big computer screens and all that, I would gladly shell out $40 for it, because Chrono Trigger is still a good game. It may not be as perfect as some classic fans say, but to me it's still a good game worthy of that price. But what Square Enix did instead was basically stick a Photoshop smoothing filter over it. Now, for those who aren't too hip on emulation or classic packs, oftentimes when it comes to these emulators, what you get is a bunch of filters you can choose from. When it comes to classic re-releases, oftentimes the developers will choose the filter for you. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. Chrono Trigger definitely didn't work. It moved out way too much, making it look like a blurry mess. It also made the sprites too bright. It was almost painful to look at. It was basically crap. Square Enix has patched it. You now get a choice to turn the filter off, play the game completely unfiltered. That does cause some other graphical blemishes. Mainly you get pixelated dots and stuff, and it looks a little bit on the blurry side now. It looks a little bit too rough. What I wish Square Enix had done is give us multiple of filters to choose from. Personally, when it comes to 16-bit games like Chrono Trigger, I'm finding myself liking the line filter, the CRT filters, that make it look like I'm playing on an old CRT television from the 90s, as long as they don't get too carried away and make it look like my TV's about to explode, like Capcom's Mega Man collection. I usually find that the games look better when they have those lines across them, because that's what they were originally developed for, and they look best when that filter is applied. I just wish Square Enix had done that. And for those who are wishing that Square Enix will go back and patch the classic Final Fantasy V and 6 versions and take away that filter, I hate to break it to you guys, the problem with those games' looks aren't filters. Final Fantasy V and 6, from what I can tell, are full-blown remakes for mobile devices. They're not involving any type of filters to make them look strange. They are using a bit of a Photoshop smoothing filter to make them shiny, but they're not using filters, so don't expect the same type of quick patch job to fix those anytime soon. But let's talk about what's still left over from mobile here when it comes to Chrono Trigger. The heads-up display is now, for the most part, completely gone. And for my opinion, I actually like that fact. Some gamers got a little annoyed because your health bar and your CTP bar are now beneath the characters. And yes, occasionally that can obscure the battlefield just a little bit. But I like the fact that without that huge heads-up display, I can see more of the area of combat, and to me it made the game more enjoyable. I actually found it to be one of the few good upgrades of the Steam version. Again, overall, graphically, when it comes to a classic game, Chrono Trigger does look good. Just play it without the new filter, and I do hope Square Enix one day does go back and again rebuilds the game from the ground up to give us a proper HD port of this game, because Chrono Trigger is definitely worth it, just not this version of it. When it comes to the sound and music in this game, I find that it has aged just as well as the graphics. The music is top notch, some of the best video game music I've ever heard. The music tracks stick with you, they fit each of the different areas well. It helps add in an extra dimension of wonder to this game and does a really good job of eliciting feelings. I enjoyed the music. Sound effects, although there's no voice acting, the sounds are still pretty good too. Overall, when it comes to the sound and music, this is a great sounding game. When it comes to Chrono Trigger, yes, I do feel that this game is a bit overhyped. It is not my number one pick for best JRPG of all time. I have other games that I've played way more and have enjoyed way more than Chrono Trigger. With that said, it does deliver quite a bit. The battle system is extremely well balanced. The characters are all funny and memorable. The story is fast paced. The settings are just gorgeous for a 16-bit game. It has indeed aged like fine wine, and it is a game that I do highly recommend. And there's plenty of innovations from this that you can see leak out into future games. So for a game for 1995, it was ahead of its time in a really good way. So yes, I do recommend trying this game. As far as the Steam version goes, is it the best game out there? Well, it's the best version of it I've played, but the only other version I played is the PlayStation 1 version, which a lot of people say is the worst, and I kind of agree with it, especially with the load times that are available in the PlayStation 1 version of this game. So, Steam version is not the worst. That said, the way they tried to push it out with that terrible graphical filter, Square Enix deserved to be hammered, and I am glad that they fixed it. It is not a Tales of Symphonia moment where the final version actually ends up being the best version, unfortunately, but the patch version definitely is worth playing, and if you have $15 extra, it's worth picking up to try this classic, or to put on your wish list and picking it up for $6 or $7 when this goes on sale. It's a classic, definitely worth playing all these years later in my book. This is Tommy the Game Master, thanking you for listening to this video. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below.